Unconventional Life, welcome back to the summit. This is your host, Jules Schroeder. I have got Eric Termuende in the house from Mazatlan, Mexico. Eric, welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to get out of the sun for a little bit. I mean, I know the skin doesn't show that I'm exactly tan, but this is pretty tan for me. So to get in, catch some water and refresh a little bit. Great time.
Awesome. Anytime you're in the beach in the dead of winter, it's always a good sign.
No complaints. I'm living in Vancouver right now, but when I was in Edmonton in Alberta in Canada, the plane was 45 minutes delayed because it was 29 below Celsius, which is actually pretty close to 29 below Fahrenheit as well too. And the plane wouldn't start, so the maintenance had to come out and crank it to start before we head down here. So it's a nice change for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Well, awesome. So Eric, for those of you that don't know, he is the founder of the Driver Group, which is a people-based tech consultancy company. So basically, they've built a tool that quantifies culture. So we'll explain that in a few moments. But he's also the author of the book Rethink Work, which is coming out in 2017. I know it's been named, in Canada, especially, as one of the best books for 2016, and all these cool awards. And I know you're also an international speaker talking about the future of work. So for those that are listening that are, wanting to figure out how do you survive in culture, how do you thrive in culture, what is your relationship to work, especially as millennials? I know, Eric, you've got a lot of goodness in store for us. So with that being said, welcome to the show. Fill in any gaps that I might have left out and give us a glimpse into your personal life.
Yeah, I mean, thanks again for having me. It's awesome to be here, awesome to be part of everything that you're creating, and really great to be able to talk about things that I'm really passionate about. I mean, it's been a crazy few years to get to wherever here is, and I think at the same time, as I'm sure you can agree, here is just kind of just the start of whatever's coming next. And so the focus for 2017 certainly will be speaking, writing, building this company in the next, and just trying to make as big of an impact as possible, while still trying to remove the negative connotation associated with work and positively impact as many people around me as possible.
Yeah, I love that. Well, just to give a few details of your story, we were talking right before we started the interview. When Eric was in college, he was managing an $18 million budget for 25,000 students, was one of the top 5 students in his school. And that was after 2 years of dropping out.
Well, I took a semester off. I told mom that I was taking a semester off. I think in my head, I thought I was going to drop out. But when I got away from school, I realized I had to come back, finish it up, and really explore probably a different area of education than I thought, that wasn't so much academically focused, but more on the social side, on the communications, which is something I did a lot better at.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, yeah. So talk about the concept of rethinking work. And I know American Express rated you like one of the top under 35 for innovators globally. So lots of stuff in store. So for those listening, make sure to pay attention. But Eric, take us back in time a little bit. Like what was it like for you growing up? Like if we could have put be a fly on the wall of Eric, in grade school, high school, were you entrepreneurial? Were you a weird kid? Like give us the world of.
Yeah. Canada, which doesn't really narrow it down much, but small town British Columbia, so small town Western Canada, with my mom, my dad, and my brother. Come from a town of 20,000 people, Cranbrook, British Columbia. And honestly, life was great. It was coming to think back, actually, success wasn't really measured by the title that you had, the amount of money that you had, the amount of education that you had, or the salary that you made. It was more made on more of a happiness index. And I think that's really what's driven me in my career, is to be pursuing the things that ultimately make me happy and not necessarily make the most money. Now, if what I'm doing happens to bring a lot of money with it, that's a bonus for sure. But life was more, how is it that we can take off and go camping for a month or 2 months with our friends and family and ultimately have as much fun as possible? And what was really cool about that is we had a really great family and friend group that we could share that with. And I think that kind of fueled my growth into more of how is it that I can build a community, build this tribe, build this sense of belonging, and ultimately be happiest doing what I'm doing. And so that took me right into high school and university. When I got to university, I didn't do as well academically as I thought I was going to do because I hadn't come to that realization yet. And success to me in university meant, how do I get that white collar job where I can wear a tie to work, carry a briefcase, and ultimately do deals in the boardroom with all the big players. When my GPA was slipping and I was on what we call a dean's vacation almost, which means almost failing. It was about 52%, I think. I decided I had to recalibrate, step back, and reevaluate as to what was going on. So when I stepped away, realized that it was the connections and the people that were more important than necessarily just the grades. I came back, got involved with clubs, the student union, as you mentioned, various different groups, and a part-time job and everything else. And I found that the more I actually distracted myself and was doing things that I was good and passionate good at and passionate about, that actually my grades started to improve quite dramatically. And as a result, ended up doing quite well, but not well enough to get the job that I was dreaming for.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like at an early age, you kind of knew that there was more than kind of the system that had been paved out, and, navigating your own relationship to it. And at what point was it when you came back and you started to kind of redevelop the passions that you were like the rethink work? I know you probably wouldn't have called it that at that age, but some of that,
it was like, I got to get a job.
Yeah.
I got to work.
Yeah, totally. Like how was that brain kind of being influenced by the practicality of like, I got to get a job, I'm graduating, what's my degree? Like, how is the duality of those two things?
Yeah, I think what the realization, the reason why I came back to school is because I realized that I was running from my fear, my problems. The fear is that I wasn't going to do well enough to get the job that I dreamed of. When I realized that the reason we should travel is not to run away from, but to run to something, it gave me a total flip on why I was doing what I was doing. So then I realized that what I had to do was run to these problems and not away from them. And so my 3-month trip to Australia actually was turned into a 3-week trip and turned around pretty quick. Made a bunch of money just in small, like part-time jobs in small town home to get back to school and do the things that I was ultimately better at. And then when I realized too, as we got farther along and as I got closer to graduation, that success for me wasn't necessarily the success of what society told me it to be. And so I think that society tells us that to be successful, you have to have a lot of money, a lot of material, a big title, and a lot of education. And I don't think that that's not right. But I think your definition of success could be a lot different than mine. The things that can make you happy might be a lot different than things that make me happy. And so as we get into rethinking work, I think we ultimately have to redefine what it means to be successful to ourselves and understand what it means to be successful and be okay with what it means to be successful for us. Because ultimately, if we can do a job that enables a life that we want to live, then I think we can all be successful in our own way.
Yeah, totally. And I love that. I'm like noticing myself. I'm like, let's go deeper there right now.
Right,
and we'll go there in a few moments.
Sure.
We'll talk all about Rethink Works. But in your own story, when you came back, what did you get your degree in? Did you get a traditional job? Yeah. Or when did the fascination of culture and people,
well, what happened when I got back, grades started getting better. I did okay, but not well enough to ultimately get that job. I didn't actually have the grades. And like many millennials now, Gen Z, I guess, depending on how you want to define them, are getting into this like first wave of their career. What I did, and what a lot of my colleagues or peers or friends had done too, is almost like blanket applied to as many places as possible. How do I get that cover letter with an interchangeable sentence that I can tailor to whatever that company is that I'm trying to apply for, and fire off 60 resumes to as many people, only then to reevaluate what those opportunities are to see what's best for me. When I didn't get any interviews or any calls back, I thought that either I'm going to have to get more education, improve on some of the classes that I didn't do very well at, or settle. And settling wasn't really an option. And I obviously wasn't all that great at school and didn't have a ton of interest in it. But I did value the informal education. The experience of school, I think, was fantastic. And some of the things that my university enabled me to do and being part of those clubs and being a part of these different groups was something I'm still grateful for. And so the opportunity then was, if we take myself as a case study and my co-founder, who was an absolute scholar, a very prominent academic who's doing very well for himself, we then thought, how can we close this age and communication gap and skill gap in the workplace by ultimately rethinking what it means to be working and enable people to find employment based on fit, belonging, something that's bigger than just skills and requirements, which obviously aren't any less important, but then aren't really the differentiating factor like fit might be. And so we created this diagnostic tool and got into the working world, which was certainly entrepreneurial as well, but something that enabled us to be the best that we could be.
Yeah, totally. So how old were you when you started? Did you start right when you got out of college? Was that, or did you?
We started actually right before we finished. So I still had about 8 months left. And the company, we started when I was 22.
Yeah. So being a young entrepreneur, I imagine you probably didn't know what you were doing, or
Still
like,
don't. We're
yeah,
still
still
trying to
don't,
figure it
right?
out, right? Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
literally talking to someone today and he's like, yeah, I've been at it for a year and I feel like I'm
Yeah.
at rock bottom again. And I'm like,
Right.
still don't have clients, still don't have
Yeah.
that. And I was like,
Yeah.
welcome to the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Welcome to entrepreneurship. This thing that we
totally.
glorify and glamorize endlessly that really isn't quite that story.
Totally. You'll make it one year, you'll lose it the next. It's
That's right.
like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you start to, for someone listening that's putting themselves and wanting to start the path of entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
what were some steps that you took, or how did you start to immerse yourself in that new world? Was it conscious at the time, or you kind of just doing what you knew what to do in the moment, or what kind of, if you had any awareness on it?
I think a lot of it is, if you're lost in a big, scary city, one of the best pieces of advice that I got is always to walk with intention. Walk like you know where you're going and walk like you've got it all figured out. And I think that sense of confidence and that sense of understanding when you're getting into something a little bit unknown, that's something a little bit, it can be quite scary, is really important. And I knew my skill set. I knew my co-founder's skill set at the time, and they were vastly different, even though we shared the same idea. We really leveraged the skills of each other to provide a service and ultimately later on a product that we could really be comfortable with. We found a few early clients that wanted to support us, that thought we could support them as well, obviously. Ran numerous beta tests and just tried to get out there, tried to talk about it, tried to understand the landscape, understand the market, make sure that we were talking about and providing the right things and the right services to the right people, and being really relentless. I mean, we talk about glorifying hustle and busy, and really I think that none of us, I'm an advocate for anti-hustling. I think that work ethic and focus are something that actually should be far more important than doing too many things at once, trying to multitask, trying to be a part of too many things at too many places at too many times. And so when we tried to make sure that we had that client that we were really delivering on, and really making sure that they would give us a positive reference and then talk about us to their network as well, we knew that we could really grow the company. And I think that, we talk about the Wall Street book. I'm sure you've heard of it, the Too Big to Fail, right? About all the banks. Well, the line that we used with entrepreneurship with our company is that we were too small to fail. Because if we'd failed, people would have talked about us and our reputation would have been absolutely ruined right out the gate, and nobody would have worked with us. And so we knew that we had to deliver. We knew we had to do good work. And if we didn't, that would pretty much be it. So It was high stakes, but it was ultimately hard work and focus that I think that got us to the next step.
Yeah, totally. So I know, as a consulting agency working with clients, service-based type of business model, for someone that's wanting, because I know we have people that are listening that, are thinking about a similar model. So if we kind of go meta for a few moments, could you give a step-by-step of maybe either steps that you took or steps that you'd recommend now for starting a similar kind of type of agency?
The thing is I think a lot of people want to be thought leaders, they want to be change makers, but they don't create content. And I think a lot of people have a lot of value stuck in their heads that think that their clients and their people would really enjoy, that really would get a lot of value from, but don't do anything with. And so one thing that we did early was to create a lot of content, to create a lot of material, to create a lot of value upfront and early, to allow people to know that we're thinking a little bit different, that we're actually thinking, and that we can provide a lot of value to them. And so when we did that and we provided some upfront value, we wanted to make sure that people knew that we were, I would say, the real deal, or as real as we could be at the time, and getting some of those close friends and those contacts in our network to understand and endorse what we were doing and ultimately be our first clients. It wasn't ever about making money in the first year or two, or I would say even now, it's about creating a rock solid product with a rock solid client base that we know will tell our story for us. Because we know that if Jules is talking about one of her friends to me about being a good speaker, or that I wrote a good book, it's going to be far easier than me trying to go up to someone and say, hey, will you buy my new book? It's really good. Trust me, I wrote it. And so when we get someone else telling our story for us, because we've proven the model and we've proven value to them early, we know that's a far better tactic than trying to go and push something ourselves.
Yeah, totally. I like that you're touching on that point about content specifically. And I was actually talking to Rob Fajardo with the founders, and
of course.
we were just jamming about this. But I mean, I think when you talk about
he's a perfect example too. I mean, I see his content all the time. And the thing about him that he's so good at is it's so consistent. He's always producing something that's always of a value to a very specific audience as well. It's not too scattered. It's very focused, and he's providing value to them. So I think hats off to him.
Yeah, totally. So in your opinion, for what you guys did, at least, like if someone wanted to duplicate or copy or be inspired by the actions that you took early on to like lay out your own content and,
Right.
you know, get your clients, what would be the formula they should follow?
The formula would be to land that first client, someone that you trust, someone that loves what you're doing, someone that believes in what you're doing, and really hit it out of the park for them. Really prove to them that they got 4x what they paid for, and that they know that if they recommended you, that it not only would it be doing you a favor, but it'd be doing them a favor too. Because I think that if you can get that exponential marketing or references or testimonials from someone that they really believe in, then it's a no-brainer. And I think you can pay for endless AdWords or Google ads or any sort of Facebook promotion and stuff like that. But if you're self-promoting without any proof or validation of the work that you're doing, it's going to be really hard to get into a new market.
Yeah, totally. Okay, awesome. So, you know, there you are. You've had this company. How old are you now?
I'm 24. Yeah, 25. I think 25 by the time of the summit. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you've been at it for what, like with this business, 2 years or so?
2.5.
Two and a half years. Yeah. And now you're in this place where, you know, you were doing the consulting agency kind of model, and now you're transitioning. You're this internationally recognized speaker. You've got this book coming out that's already been ranked in Canada, one of the top best books, and all these new transitions. So when did you know it was time to transition and to reinvent yourself? Was it a conscious choice, or did it happen organically? And I ask that question because as someone that keeps reinventing herself every few years, I think often we think that we have to stick to something or just stay with it, but there are these natural shifts. And so what was it like for you in your own story?
Truthfully, I think some of the speaking and thought leadership was where I wanted to go. In fact, in high school, I told my parents that by the time I was 40, I wanted to be on stages and be a thought leader and change maker, not for the sake of hearing my voice heard, but because the people actually found there's value in what I had to say. 40 became 30, 30 became 25, and 25 became 23, and it became a reality. And so I think the consulting and the work that we did was ultimately to create content, to create information, to create value that people ultimately, I don't think really had heard before. It was a little bit cutting edges, a little bit forward thinking. It was from a new generation of people that was trying to make a difference or an impact in the world that they were living in. And it's kind of been a gradual step to be able to create the content, to have the validation, and to have the backing to ultimately make this work. And so this transition, though consulting is still very much a priority, because I think that's where some longer term impact can be made, especially with organizations. Ask my partners, they'll tell you I'm absolutely horrific at sales. And so that's not my skill. My skill is more being an evangelist, being a storyteller, being this person that can be the face of an organization that can ultimately have a lot of work being done by the people that I'm working with, that obviously are of extreme value when you pair up complementary skill sets.
Yeah, totally. So do you think everyone is a storyteller or has stories inside of them that should be told? Like for someone listening to this that has this like gut of like, I think I got something to say, but I'm not sure. Like what do you think about that?
I mean, absolutely is the short answer. Does it mean that we all should just stand on a soapbox and just preach and tell and push our stories? No, I don't think so. But at the same time, there's a time and place and a lot of value in the experiences that we've got, whether you're 14 or 74 or anything in between or 94. There's a lot that can be learned. And I think that if we get into this a little bit, we get into some of the buzzwords like leadership and sustainability and mentorship. And if we talk about mentorship, I think the idea of mentorship is almost like losing its edge too, because mentorship, I think in at least the corporate sense now, is when you've got a senior providing a lot of information and experience to a junior. When the reality of it is you could be mentoring me right now. My younger brother could be mentoring me, I think, is when we transfer knowledge, experience, understanding from one person to the other, that we're ultimately, in a way, mentoring one another. And so to keep these stories locked in a box is not going to do anyone any favors, and there's going to be value regardless of who you're talking to.
Yeah, totally. So obviously, you've had success in sharing what's like imprinted inside and getting it outside, whether it's through the book or through speaking or through your clients in the consulting. But for someone that still has stuff inside of them, how do you develop like the tactileness or the capacity to translate it? Like what kind of preparations do you need to do? What kind of work do you need to do? Is there specific steps you could take?
Practice is obviously a huge one. I mean, I wrote a book. I'm sure we'll get to that, but I had to write it 4 times before it was ready. And before that, it was 50 articles. And truthfully, I'm not even a really great writer. I could hardly spell my last name if you got me to spell it. And so to get into this thought leadership and to know that I had to be really working on something that I wasn't all that great at to start was certainly a huge challenge. And so to get these stories out to a mass audience, if that's what your goal is, it doesn't just mean Snapchat. It doesn't just mean video blogs. It doesn't just mean articles. It doesn't just mean a book. It doesn't just mean stages. It means a combination of everything, because your audience is going to find your information from a lot of different mediums and a lot of different platforms. And so I think establishing one that you really want to focus on, for myself, it's been LinkedIn and lately Influensive, and of course the stages, to then getting into something like a book, to then getting into Medium posts, then to getting into Facebook. 2017 is going to be the year of YouTube for me, I think. When I get into that, I'll have to call Rob and see what he has to say. And Facebook hasn't been a focus yet either, but my audience, I've been really saying, how do we then educate or work with that corporate audience that probably isn't on Facebook, that probably isn't on Snapchat, that probably doesn't utilize YouTube like they would an influensive site, LinkedIn profile, or a stage at a conference that they're going to. Now I'm trying to expand the reach to more of a B2C instead of just a B2B, and I'll have to utilize those platforms to do that. But I'll be the first one to say that that's not a skill set. That's not something that's really native to me. That's not something I'm really good at. So it's going to take a lot of work. So anyone who's looking to start to share their stories, first of all, understand who your audience is, who you really want to impact, what platforms and what mediums are they using. And if that's the one that you're really good at, really focus on it. If it's not, make sure that you're working at it to make sure that that is something you can be really good at.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you mentioned LinkedIn, because we were talking about this the other day, and had around 100,000 views on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you could actually get that kind of traffic on
LinkedIn. It works. I didn't know either.
Yeah, and you were like, yeah, my audience is on LinkedIn, and so I just kind of want to zoom into LinkedIn for a minute. Why did you choose LinkedIn? And this kind of will segue nicely into, Rethink Work and the work that you're up to. But what is there to know about LinkedIn? Like, how does it work for you? And
it's an incredible tool. I mean, it might not be, it certainly is that millennial audience as well. But when you look at a professional, clean, I would say filtered source of information, that's still pretty safe, I would say. I mean, when you get on, you're not going to find cat videos. You're not going to find videos of, smack cams and car accidents that are jokes and things like that. I don't know. What you get is professional people looking for information that can better their careers. They're looking for people, or on LinkedIn, you'll get people that are looking to level up in their professional side of things. We know we've got Facebook, we know we've got YouTube, we know we've got Instagram, we've got WhatsApp, we've got Periscope, we've got everything else. But I think LinkedIn is the one place that's still focused on that individual who's looking to better their professional side of them. And so I find that my content really resonates with the working world when that's the information I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, nice. Well, let's talk about the working world and Rethink Work specifically, which you started writing that how long ago? I know it started, it started as blog posts.
Under a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Year and a half ago. Okay.
Yeah.
And you were blog posting before? Tell me the lead up to it.
The lead up was from a lot of the content that we created, from the company. And so through our findings, we found that there were a lot of people that wanted a lot of different things at work. Surprise, surprise. But it wasn't necessarily about the beer pong table or the keg in the office that created a good or best culture. In fact, what we found is that a universal best culture doesn't exist, because a working space for you that you might find is fantastic might actually be a toxic working environment for me, and vice versa. We might see an introverted person that really wants that space to themselves, that actually has a door and everything else. Whereas you might see an extroverted real team player that wants the beanbag chair, that wants 6 people around them, that wants to do that scrum with a whiteboard and brainstorm and mind map everything and just have a bit of a crazy work environment. And that might be a best culture too. But if you look at the Fortune top 100 places to work in the States right now, number 1 is Google. Maybe no surprise there, but number 4 is Wegmans, a grocery chain. And I have to explain that to Canadians because we don't have Wegmans. But basically what I'm trying to say is, if we leverage a best culture to be just that, and we say Wegmans has got one of the top 5 cultures in the States, and then you brought someone from Google to place into Wegmans, I can bet you that they wouldn't have the same experience that someone that was at Wegmans, that loved Wegmans, really had, and vice versa. Yeah. And so that to me says that You can't have a best culture that applies to everyone. What you can have, though, is an optimized culture based on who's there and what environment's been created. And so it's been a real focus to really rethink what it means to work based on who people are and what they value. And I think that varies significantly depending on who we're talking to.
Totally. So for those listening right now, like here we are in the summit, it's the middle of, January 2017, up-leveling areas of your life, accelerating your business. How does this message, how does it apply? What is the gold that people need to hear from this message to take action on what's alive for them?
Okay. Work doesn't have to be something that we have to do. It can be something that we get to do. And I think you're a perfect example of this. I think I'm trying to live a life that I'm happy to go to work on Monday morning or Sunday afternoon or whenever it is on a Thursday night, because I like the work that I'm doing. And I think that success ultimately in the work that we're doing is going to be largely based on who we are. And I think that we get caught up, especially in the world that we're living in, that's so hyper connected, that society tells us that success is so limited, that you have to be doing this thing and that thing and the other thing in order to be successful. And so I think that largely, and I noticed this with myself, a lot of my social posts, whether it be on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, were not to validate what I was doing to myself, but it was to validate what I was doing to my network. And I realized that was the biggest problem. That was the biggest realization that I had, is that it wasn't really about what my network approved of me to do. It was about what would put a smile on my face at the end of the day. And so I think to rethink work, we can ultimately remove the negative connotation associated with work. We can rehumanize the workplace by making it not a place where we just text and tap and type and swipe to each other who's sitting next cubicle across, where we can actually have these human relationships, where we can have a sense of tribe, of belonging, of community. Because if work is something we do more than anything else in a day, and it already is, I mean, if we work 10 hours a day, including the time that we're on our phone while making dinner or on the conference call while we're in the car or the train on the way home, we might be working 10, 11, or 12 hours a day. I mean, tell me the last time you got 11 hours of sleep, right? I mean, it doesn't happen. When's the last time you watched or went and played soccer or any sort of sports for even more than 2 hours a day? I mean, work is something we do more than anything else in a day. So I think we have to enjoy it. And I think that in order to find a career or a job that we can be happy doing, we almost have to take what society's definition of success is and table it, and ultimately pursue the things that we're most passionate about. And I think that if I can elaborate on that as well too, it's not necessarily about finding that one passion, because I don't think we'll ever stop looking. I think it's about finding the things that make us feel passionate. And I think we can get that feeling from an infinite number of experiences.
Yeah, I love that. So to kind of play devil's advocate with you for a moment. So let's say, my work environment, I'm in this job, I feel like I have pretty minimal control, little control over my environment, little control of I'm really affected by my circumstances.
Yeah.
How do I take this on? How can I apply with what you're saying, or how can I even, dance with it?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of the times we know the things that really make us happy, and we fail to really execute on them because there's a lot of fear of the unknown. And I think that even now millennials are really, really challenged with those side hustles and the other things. But I think if you were to use your example, we can still take on that side project, do the thing that makes us happy, and ultimately use the communication skills that we don't utilize enough to get the things that make us happiest. And by that, I mean, it's not so much about sending a text or a 2-line email anymore. It's about having a conversation that I think has been lost because of the frequency and the ease of accessibility to this technology that is preventing us from making those steps and moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. So let's say for someone that's listening that is wanting to create their dream work environment, they're wanting to rethink work, they're wanting to take what you've got in the book, take all the stuff that you're saying. Where should they start? What's the very first thing they should do? And how could they either right now in this moment or right after the interview, how could they get into action around it?
I did this with someone actually, and it worked really well. What I said is, okay, let's take a list and take a T chart, a blank sheet of paper, draw a T on it and say must have and can't have. And for your dream job, what is it that your dream job must have? And what is it that your dream job can't have? Okay. And if your dream job can't have work on Saturdays and Sundays, fine. That's great. And if it must have an open communication or open door policy or something like that, great. Put that in there. And if we start to add enough of those must haves and can't haves, then truthfully, by the time we're finished, we've actually narrowed it down to a very small spectrum or scope of jobs that would be a good fit for us. And then it's not so much about reading the job descriptions, because I think a job description isn't really a job description at all. It's a skills and requirements checklist. It's about actually having an interview or having a coffee or a conversation with someone who's in that position to go through that list and say, what does your job have and what doesn't it have, so that I know this might be a better fit for us. And we talked about that article that had 100,000 hits on LinkedIn last week. The article was the one question that we need to be asking recruiters that we don't. And I think that one question actually isn't answered by the recruiter at all. It's answered by the person that you're going to have a 30-minute coffee with who's already in your position. So the question is can I have a 30-minute conversation with somebody who's already in the position that you're hiring me for? Because if you're in the position that I'm going to be hired for, I'd love to have a 30-minute conversation with you and say, what's your life like at home? How many countries have you been to in the past year? What sports are you able to play? How many times have you been hiking? Like, what's your commute like to work? What's the communication like? What's the performance management like? What's the feedback like? How much do you get to talk to your superior? What's the actual experience like at work? Because if we're looking at a job description, we don't see that, right? And so how do we actually bring the human element back to these jobs and see, okay, well, look at my list. This actually fits. This might be a great career for me.
Totally. And so let's say, you get the piece of paper right now, you make your list, must-haves, can't-haves, you look and it's not a fit for what you have right now. Mm-hmm. What might you recommend for finding the fit?
I think that, a lot of us will have pretty vast networks, and starting to talk to people who are in jobs that we think we might actually really enjoy, and starting to prospect and see what those opportunities are is a really good idea. I mean, none of these things are going to happen overnight. Being patient and being really resilient and being really thorough obviously is really important. If you take my mistake and a lot of what my friends did too, and just blanket apply to 60 jobs and hope that one of them stick, I really don't think that's going to work. And so really either sticking it out until you can find that good fit, or having a conversation with the senior people in your organization or your employer and saying, look, this isn't quite working for these reasons, and here's why. A lot of people are actually pretty understanding and making that adjustment.
Yeah, awesome.
I find that the biggest thing that we've identified in the past couple of years is the biggest problem in the workplace isn't really anything with the workplace at all. It's a lack of communication. We assume that we know what people are thinking. We assume that a terse one-liner email is going to be good enough. And that lack of communication is really prohibiting a relationship from developing, real communication from happening.
Yeah, so good. So for all my entrepreneurs in the house, how can they do the same thing? How can they how can they rethink their own work?
I mean, entrepreneurship, I think, is the easiest way, because we get to build the life that we're living. That doesn't make the job of an entrepreneur any easier, but it makes the lifestyle of an entrepreneur something that we choose to do, and not something that we have to do, because we can ultimately control our surroundings and control our actions. Now, when we're developing a product or a service or something like that, there are hours that are going to have to be put in that are much longer and everything else. But that doesn't mean that we can't take a Wednesday afternoon off or show up late for work on a Monday morning. But it probably will mean having to work really late on Tuesday, all day Saturday, and maybe all day Sunday too. But if you're an entrepreneur and if that's what you want to do, chances are that's not going to be a problem. That's going to be a choice that you're willing to make.
Yeah, so good. So just before we move into the rapid fire round, is there one last piece of knowledge out of everything we said? I know we've talked a lot about, from like interviewing the person, the dream job, 30-minute coffee date, to making a list. I mean, we've covered a lot. But if there's one last thing that you could imprint anyone that's hearing this right now, what do you want them to receive?
I would say that don't think that your success or my success or anyone else's success is really comparable in the ways that traditionally we've thought it to be. And I think that whatever it is that makes you happiest, that you can ultimately pursue with as much passion as possible, that is going to be the thing that puts a smile on your face as wide as ear to ear as possible at the end of the day. And that's what I think you'll feel the least resistance with as well when moving forward.
Awesome. All right, Eric, rapid fire round, series of random questions. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Question number 1, fill in the blank.
Okay.
If you really knew me, you would know what?
That I love traveling. So I think it was 95 flights this year. And the more of the world that I can see, the better.
Awesome. Next question. What is one practice that you do daily that you feel keeps you in the zone, helps contribute to your success?
I'm not really the practice meditation mantra kind of guy, but I try and get a good night's sleep every night. If I can get 8 hours, awesome, because I think that being rested and being ready to go for the next day is really important.
Nice. Next question. What is one limiting belief about yourself that you've had to overcome?
Being a young entrepreneur, being a young thought leader, being a young author, I've experienced the imposter syndrome quite a bit. And essentially what that means is, where that came from is a lot of students from Harvard. This is where it originated, is thought that they weren't good enough to be at Harvard, because when they got next to their classmates in the first day of school, they just saw all the accolades and the accomplishments of the people around them, and they didn't think they were good enough to be there. And so I've really had to battle through ensuring that I believed in my story and my value enough to tell it to people that thought the same thing.
Yeah. Tag question. How did you do that? Because I know that some people, including myself, have definitely had that before.
When you're speaking on stage, a lot of the testimonials, a lot of the referrals, a lot of the ratings from the presentations are something that I really had to take seriously. When I saw that some things were rated slightly lower, then I really worked on them. And when things were rated really high, I emphasized and focused on them. And so when by the end of, the first few presentations, when I was rated in the top X percentile, I started to realize that, there might be a little bit of value here. When I started to realize that my articles were doing quite well, started to really focus on that and be proud of it as well, and kind of got over that.
Yeah, love that. Next question. If I gave you $1 million right now and said that you had 3 days to spend all of it, how would you spend your money?
I mean, the millennial in me is supposed to say that I do something really charitable, and that would certainly be a part of it. I would invest a large chunk of it. I would, the truth is, when you're starting out in this entrepreneurial lifestyle, it's not incredibly lucrative to start unless you're really good at what you're doing, unless you really nailed it and really focused on it, and you're really addressing a need that a lot of people have. For me, I've actually trained myself to live a fairly limited life. I don't have huge overhead. I don't have a ton of expenses. And so I wouldn't just go and spend all of it right away. It'd be saved for a rainy day for when the time is right. But a chunk of it would go to charity, a chunk of it would go to a long-term savings account, and a chunk of it would go to my TFSA. And I'd maybe get the family a gift or something along the line, and just have a little bit of fun with a little bit of a chunk of it.
Nice.
So that's a really boring answer. I wouldn't just go and spend it. A lot of it would bank for a rainy day. I mean, the other thing about being an entrepreneur for those who are just starting is that and I'm sure you can agree, the consistency and the budgeting and the predictability of revenue and income isn't as good as you'd hope it to be. And so having that rainy day fund is always yeah.
Totally. Awesome. All right. Last question. What does living an unconventional life mean to you?
Oh man, I think we're stuck in a world that there's so many norms, best practices, and should do's and could do's and must do's. And unconventional life is the one that you want to live. I think that is ultimately the one thing that's going to separate you from the pack, from the norm, from the masses, from everything else. And unconventional life is yours and only yours. I mean, my life is an unconventional life because I'm not trying to be someone that I'm not. I'm not trying to aspire to be one of those big thought leaders. I'm trying to be me. I'm trying to get my story out. I'm trying to have as much fun as possible. And that's pretty unconventional. But I think if we all tried to do that, there would be no conventional life, and we can all be proud of who we are.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, Eric, tell us about the giveaway that you've got for one of our listeners on deck.
All right, here it is. My new book coming out February 20th, Rethink Works. The Financial Post in Canada called it one of the best business books of 2016. Try to look here. It is 144 pages of pure gold, hearing it from the author himself, which, as I said, doesn't really do much. If Jules said it to you, you'd have to believe her a lot more than I would. But I'm really excited about this because I think what this does, especially for the audience that we're talking to today, it removes the negative connotation associated with work. It has some real tidbits, some best practices, some takeaways that can not just change work, but change the mindset and shift what we think about work, and ultimately find the best fit that's out there for us. It is unconventional in by nature, but I think that's what makes it something that I can be proud of. And I think that being proud of our work is really important. Being able to respect who we are and what we're doing is really important. And I signed it as well. I can have a note to whoever wins it. I'll make a personal note and give it away. But for anyone else who's interested, who wants to drop me a line, wants to have a chat for any reason, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And anyone listening that wants to get that book, unconventionallifeshow.com, head over there right now. And down below on the summit page, we'll have more details about entering the giveaway. And then I know it's in pre-sale right now. So how else can people take advantage of the book?
Yeah, it's Amazon.ca pre-sale Canada for now. We'll have it on Amazon.com as well. Amazon.ca Rethink Work. Eric Termuende will go like that. If anyone wants a shout, anyone wants a personal note in it or anything else, I'm happy to make that happen. Just reach out via LinkedIn, because we're on those professional networks as well as everything else. Pretty easy to reach, and happy to get back to anyone who wants to say hi.
Amazing. And Eric, any other ways people can get in touch with you if they want to chat, jam on anything we talked about today?
Yeah, Twitter's good. I mean, we're both on Influensive, so creating content and pushing it out there. LinkedIn is obviously is the big one for me, but I've got the Facebook pages up and running. I don't do Snapchat. Maybe I'm one of those 6% of millennials or something like that doesn't. But Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I'm there, and LinkedIn, of course.
Amazing. Well, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Unconventional Life Summit, another amazing interview. Get into action right away. Eric, Mexico. We will talk to you guys next time.
Thanks.